Welcome back to the Belonging Place, where we talk about the importance of community and connection and belonging. And I'm really excited to have my friend Ben Schilaty here. Thanks,
Hello.
thanks for coming, Ben. Okay, so the first question I have is, do you remember our meet cute? Do you
I
remember the first time we met?
I do.
Okay,
Yeah, it was in Washington.
okay, and we were
Maybe
doing.
maybe in a parking lot.
I think it was at a parking lot,
Yeah.
around some tables or something. Were
Uh,
there tables out
I probably
there?
there were
And what were we doing?
we were both speaking at an event for Larry St. Young Single Adults.
Yeah, yeah. And it was wild because I had been following you and
Oh.
I like knew about you and thought you were so awesome.
You were very right.
Of course. I actually had followed some of your like writings. This was before the day of like podcasts and things like that. And then you started a podcast and then we were out there speaking and I was like, "Oh, Ben, I need to meet Ben." And so that's how we met. And so on that note, we met in Washington, which
Yes.
is where you're from. So
Yes.
I would love to start this conversation a little bit like um, who Ben was, like young Ben
Uh-huh.
in Washington, and maybe with the frame, because it's like just asking you about your childhood is probably just like too broad, but like maybe if there's anything you can share about like um, forming your identity or your community or
Mhm.
like what was Ben like in Washington?
Yeah, so I'm from Everett, Washington, which is just a half an hour north of Seattle. It's like a working class town. It used to be a mill town, so it was a little smelly. I think most of the mills have closed, but it's a beautiful location. And all my family still lives there. My parents, my three siblings still live there, so I go home a lot.
All in Everett.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, in this,
In that area.
yeah, all my siblings don't live in Everett, but they live all pretty close.
Okay.
And so growing up, I come from a very like I'm the youngest of four, and I'm from a very sporty family.
Okay.
Like everyone was involved in basketball, volleyball, softball, track. Like they were all like three sport athletes, and I was just not a sporty person.
Okay.
And so it was hard to like find my people because I just wasn't interested in the same thing that most of my family was, and it was hard for me to make connections with other guys because they were all like so into sports, and I just wasn't.
Got it.
And so the way I found my people, I think I kind of like drifted like a lot of middle school, like I think a lot of people do. And then when I was in seventh grade, I was invited to like a test, see if I could test into the honors program,
Okay.
and which I did. And then eighth grade, I was put into all these honors classes, and I was like, oh, these are my people, like these brainy, nerdy people who like to talk about ideas and things. Like these are my people.
Love it. Love
Hmm.
it. Okay, and then and then where did you go from there? You went to all through high school in
Uh-huh.
Everett, okay?
Yeah. And then I tried I was on the crew team briefly, which is like
Okay.
rowing, and it's very cold in Washington. It rains a lot. So I was wet a ton. And it just like was hard to connect with people because they were just like kind of macho and often vulgar, and that just wasn't really my scene. And so after a semester I decided not to do it anymore, and I tried the track team and I had the same problem. And then my junior year I was in a bunch of plays,
Okay.
and I wouldn't call myself like an accomplished actor, but it was fun. Like it was a fun group. It was like that was like the group that I felt like I fit into better.
So we have this in common. I there's a few things we have in common that I want to talk about, but I didn't know that you were in the theater world. But one of my belonging places in high school was that I just felt like I could be my whole self versus, I don't know, like my big, loud, I don't know, just felt like a good place to just like, I ended up spending like lunchtime with my friends in choir and just like spending time there. Okay, so you did some choir, you did some,
I didn't do choir,
or sorry,
just
you
just
did
theater.
some theater, and then
I
you
I
did
am not a musical person in any
so
way.
you did
Yeah.
some theater and you did some rowing
Uh-huh.
and then you graduated.
Uh-huh.
And then where did you head off?
I went to Brigham Young University,
Okay.
BYU. I actually have 3 degrees from BYU that I call my 3 degrees of glory,
Okay.
which
What
is
are those?
I have a bachelor's in Latin American studies, a master's in Hispanic linguistics, and a master's in social work.
Okay.
And I did my PhD at the University of Arizona in Tucson.
Okay, I did know this because we also have Arizona. We both
Yeah,
did grad school in Arizona,
it's the
just
best.
different schools. You were down in Tucson, right?
Uh-huh.
And I went to ASU.
Oh no.
And but it's okay. We both got social work degrees,
Uh-huh.
different from different places, but in Arizona. And this brings me to one of my questions that I want to talk to you about. You have this like strong love for cacti.
I do.
Can we talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, so I'm from Washington, like verdant, wet, moss everywhere,
Yes.
like mushrooms grow in my front
We
yard
have
because
it. I'm from
it's so
Portland. This is
yeah,
what I need to know
yeah.
about your love of
L-
cactus because I love the trees and I love the rain. And then you moved from like
Yeah.
the wettest place to the
Yes.
driest place.
Yeah, like in my backyard where I grew up, like there's a bog, just like a mud pit. Just
Okay.
like it's just so wet all the time. So then I moved to Tucson for my PhD, and I was like, "What is this place?" Like people's yards would just be dirt,
Yes.
and I
It
remember,
couldn't be more different. I mean,
yeah,
I'm thinking where in the US could, and it's just like these are literally the opposites of each other.
yes.
Okay.
And so I remember my first house, and I didn't know anything about Tucson when I moved down there, and I rented a room in a house that was kind of in a shadier part of town.
Okay.
And outside of my front window was this huge saguaro cactus, like 20 feet tall. And I remember just like looking at that and being like, "Oh my gosh, that is so majestic." And like I'm in this like trashy neighborhood, but like that cactus was so beautiful. And then like I'd walk around and I'd see other ones, like that is so awesome. Like I've never seen anything like that. And then I started going on hikes and just I was like, these saguaros are just so beautiful. I just like could not get over how
So for the
beautiful they were.
people who don't know what you're talking about, this is the classic
Yeah,
tall with the
with
two.
the arms.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Because there's a lot of different cactus in Arizona.
yeah, but these are the tall ones.
Yeah, okay.
Mm.
And then did you ever encounter jumping
Choya,
choya?
of course.
Okay.
I
Have you
no,
on
no,
you?
no. I'm
Okay. You're
no.
smart enough.
You stay away from them. But yes, I have encountered them, and
Okay.
I have been pricked by some cacti, but
And you have hugged a cactus?
so many.
Okay.
Yeah, because I thought it'd be funny, and it's not that hard to do. All I have to do is make contact without applying pressure.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So after your first encounter with this lovely saguaro, this was it. It was love at first sight, and you were just
Yeah.
like, this is my thing.
Well, so the story you have to understand is like my first year in Arizona was one of the hardest years of my life.
Well, let me go back and ask you why Arizona? Like,
Yeah.
why?
So the PhD program I did there was it's called Second Language Acquisition and Teaching. So it's an applied linguistics degree. So
Okay.
I wanted to be a Spanish professor,
Okay.
and I loved second language acquisition, like how people learn languages, how to like teach adults languages, and that was the best program in the country.
Oh, okay. So you're just
So
like, this is it.
yeah, so it
So
wasn't because
this brings me to.
I had no interest in Arizona. I just like liked the program.
Okay.
But the thing I knew about this, but I hadn't connected all the dots, was my grandma, my mom's mom, was from Tucson, and I actually have more relatives in the ground in Tucson than I do in Washington.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So lots of family there.
Yeah,
Didn't know that. I'm learning so much about you because, and hardly anybody knows this about me, but one of my minors is linguistics.
Oh,
Yeah, at
fun.
BYU. So I am such a word nerd.
Yeah,
Sounds like you love that. Okay. So
I
you're,
love words.
okay. So sorry, let's go back. So you're in Tucson. It's of one of the most difficult years of your life.
Yeah, and it was tough because the moment I got there, like for my first meeting with the program director, I walked out of that meeting thinking, I don't want to do this. And I was like,
Okay.
oh no, what do I do? And I was 28, I was single. I knew I was gay. I'd come out to a number of people, but I was still pretty closeted. And so it's just like, I was like, what is my life supposed to look like? I just felt trapped. Like my life is like, what is the meaning and purpose of my life? I just felt so lost.
Yeah.
Because I was like, I don't want to do this career. I never gonna find anyone to marry. It's just like it just all felt so awful. And then over the next, I lived there for 5 years. Over the next few years, I came out publicly and just like had this like built this beautiful network of friends that are like family to me. And so one of the reasons I love cacti is because Tucson is where I learned to love myself.
Okay.
That's where I like learned to be me. I learned to have hope for the future. I learned that I could build community with people who were like me. I learned that I could be myself and people would love me and accept me. And so cactus to me kind of represent like coming to love myself.
Which I love, not laughing at you, but I love it so much because you've like reframed cactus. Because for the most part, people see them as like prickly and avoidant, and maybe this is one of my favorite things about you is that you have like reclaimed this thing and have just made it like lovable. For those of you who haven't necessarily like known of Ben or followed him, he used to do a series. Will you tell me about the cactus watering series and how
Oh,
that came to be? Because it might be one of my favorite things, Ben.
yeah. So because I love cacti so much, people will give me them a lot. And so when I worked at BYU in the administration, I had this big window. And so people would come and give me cacti, and I would just like put them all on the windowsill.
And some
And
were real and some were fake, right?
yeah.
Okay.
And so people just give me cactus stuff all the time. And so You don't have to water cacti a lot, so you just have to water them once a month. So I just like on the first of every month I would start watering them, and then one day I was like, I'll just film this. Why not? So I just like filmed myself watering on the cacti. And at the end I was like, I'll water one of the fake ones. Ha 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 ha. And so I posted a lot on social media, and then people thought it was hilarious.
Myself included.
Yeah,
I was one of the big super fans. I
yeah.
was like, every month I was excited. And it was a Monday usually, and
Uh-huh.
Mondays are terrible. And I was like, okay, Ben's gonna water the cactus and something funny.
Yeah, and so for I think I did that for like 3 years. Like every month, on the first of the month, I would water all my cacti, and then I would like water one of my fake cacti.
Yeah.
And
Just
but it was like a pillow or like a figurine or like a pencil.
crocheted one, I think,
Yeah,
one time
and
or
I had
something.
one. I had a friend who like came in with a cactus shirt, and I just like threw water at
Yes, I
him.
remember this one.
So
Okay, so I want to go back to Tucson because one of the belonging places, and this is what we taught, I like really want to emphasize on this podcast, was in Tucson. I know that because you just said it, but also because many times in your writings, many times in your podcasts, in your lives, you talk about,
mhm.
and also on your social media, you, as many times as you visit, and like the people that you say like are family. So can we go back there and break it down? I know you said these are
Yeah.
very, but like for people who are sort of in the stage of their life that they're just like where you were when you were in Arizona
hmm
before you figured all that out. Can you talk to me a little bit about what happened that made that change?
Yeah. So a couple things happened. So in this trashy neighborhood I lived in, my roommate, his name is Kevin,
Okay.
and he had just bought the house, and we became fast friends. And then when I just after Christmas, one of my friends came to visit from BYU. Her name is Allison, and Allison had a crush on me for years.
Okay.
And she knew I was gay, and I was like, okay, I'm getting close to 30. Like maybe Allison and I can just get married and make something work. So she comes to visit, and clearly nothing's going to happen. But she met Kevin, and she thought Kevin was kind of cool,
Okay.
and Kevin thought Allison was neat. So I helped them set up a Skype date when Allison got home, and then they fell in love and got married, which is
Oh,
wonderful.
look at that.
But once Kevin started to get interested in her, he wanted to know like why I hadn't dated her. He's like, she's so wonderful. Why haven't you dated? And I was pretty closeted back then. I'm not sure I'd come out to anyone in town yet.
So
And
just to family or people in Washington. Okay.
and like friends at BYU when
Okay.
I'd been at BYU. And so I'm like folding laundry one night. And he's like, so why didn't you ever date Allison? I was like, oh, you just never, things never lined up. And he wasn't having it. Like he kept pressing. And I finally said, well, I'm gay. And I didn't know how he would respond. And he was so nice and so kind about it. And I thought, okay, well, maybe if Kevin's nice to me, maybe other people will be nice to me too. And that gave me like a little bit more courage
It
to,
was like permission giving.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then once he and Allison got married, I of course moved out of the house. And my second year in Tucson, I got an email from from BYU. There was an alumni essay contest that wanted alumni to write about formative experiences they'd had at BYU. And I like the thought that immediately came to my head was I need to write about coming out at BYU, because I'd come out to my two best friends when I was 23 at BYU. And it was like one of the clearest promptings I've ever had. So I wrote out this essay that I felt super prompted to write about coming out to my two friends. And I felt so good about it. And like, I'm not out. I'm only told a handful of people. And so I submit this essay to this essay contest. I'm like, I don't know who's going to read this. And then it promptly lost. I did not win the essay contest. So
Okay.
nothing ever happened with it. But
Did people get to read it though, even though it lost? It lost.
no,
Oh,
no,
only the winners got.
yeah, it
Okay.
was never published.
Okay. Were
And
you relieved or were you sad?
I was bummed because
Okay.
I'd like felt
Because you were
so
ready.
I'd felt so prompted to do it. I was like,
Okay.
well, why? And then over the next year, I probably came out to 100 people. Like it just like felt like time. And then every time I'd like give them this essay. And so I
Oh,
was like, oh, that's why I was supposed to write this. And that way I didn't have to tell the same story, and it gave them basic information, and then we could have further conversations later. And then that essay became my coming out blog post. I came out on my blog when I
which I've
was
read, which
when
is
I was
amazing.
30. So you've read the essay.
I have, yeah.
And so just like that moment of like, okay, this is a story you have to share. Like now write it out. Was really powerful for me. And then that moment a year later when I was like, okay, now post this on your blog, which was so scary because like I'm the only Ben Schilaty on the internet. And so I'm really Googleable. And it's like once you put that out there, you can't take it back. And so, that stuff all happened while I was, living among the saguaros.
Yeah, so that's that's amazing. So many things because I'm a writer myself, so I love this idea that like part of your coming out process was writing.
Hmm.
Like this is how words, right? You love words. This
Hmm.
is how you sort of took the experience and put it down and then shared it with people. I mean, you also talked to people, but it seems like this was like, and then that continued. You
Hmm.
were able to write a book about it, which I want to talk about in a little bit. But I want to go back to Arizona. When you were telling people, for the most part, how did that experience go? You said you told about 100 people. So out of 100 people,
Yeah, when you're gay and closeted, most of us, this isn't everyone, but most of us, we imagine the worst thing is going to happen. Like, I'm going to come out and then this bad thing is going to happen. Sometimes the bad thing does happen, but usually it doesn't. And so it was always a relief because it was almost always better than I expected, because the worst case scenario almost never happens.
yeah.
And I had a weird experience because, like, growing up in Washington, like, it was weird that I was Mormon.
Right.
Uh, and then
Yeah.
like here in Utah, it's like weird that I'm gay.
Okay.
And I remember I was teaching a class at the University of Arizona. I taught Spanish there while I was doing my PhD, and I had to like leave early because I was being interviewed for this documentary about gay Mormons. And so I was like telling class like, "Hey, we're ending class early. I have an interview." And they said, "Oh, you're applying for a job." I was like, "Oh no, it's a documentary." And like, "Well, it's a documentary about." I was like, "It's about gay Mormons." And this kid slapped his desk, and he was like, "You're Mormon?" And like that was the weird thing.
Right.
Yeah. Um,
Depending on where you are,
uh-huh.
right?
Yeah. And so I just like I feel like no matter where I've been, like there's always like one part of me that's like weirds people out a little bit, or like is a little unsettling or maybe uncomfortable. And I just had to learn like it's okay, like let people be uncomfortable, let them see me. And like so coming out, I would like almost everyone I'd come out to had been a member of the church, and so they'd be like how is it possible that you're gay? It's just like what? And then I had this good friend from the university I'd met at school who wasn't a member of the church, and when I came out to her, she was like, whatever. I was like, this doesn't shake your worldview. And well, I didn't say that, like that was in my head. She's like, yeah, well, what's the big deal? I know lots of gay people.
Yeah.
But like to me, it was this like big moment, and it
Yeah.
and it wasn't to her because she's like, I don't care.
And how did that feel being reflected back that somebody was just like, okay.
I think honestly it was a little weird because I wanted, like, to me it was such a big deal. So for it to be treated so nonchalantly was almost jarring, but it was great. And it was nice to get to a place of like, oh, this is just a normal thing.
Yeah.
Like this isn't something that when I come out now, it's not a big deal. It's just part of my lived experience.
And do you still feel like you have to come out to people?
100%. You
Really? Talk
always
to me about that.
you have to come out forever. Like every new person I meet, I have to come out to, because we live in a heteronormative society where people just assume you're straight.
And they probably always want to, do people always want to set you up with people?
I mean, I also have to like come out as being single. So I think people just assume I'm married because I've got gray hair and I
They do. I
yeah.
would kind of love to. We also share this single and older thing. I would love if people just assumed I was married.
Yeah, I think people just assume I'm married. Well, I know they do because they ask me like, "Oh, how many kids do you have?" I'm like, "Oh, I don't have
Oh,
any kids." And
yeah. Okay, so you're doing like double come out
yeah,
all the time.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. But it's like not being single. I mean, it's a little stigmatized, but it's not as stigmatized here as being gay.
Right.
Like no one is putting forth legislation to take away the rights of straight or single people.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, so I always have to come out. Like I'm in a new congregation in where I live, and I didn't, like, people didn't know. Like I have this rainbow wristband, but that can mean a lot of things, and so I still have to tell people that I'm gay and
Okay.
come out.
And
And
and people are good still about it. People are weird about it, depending on where you are, I guess maybe.
I would say everyone's always kind about it, but a lot of people don't know what to say. They're just like thrown off.
Okay.
Like in a lot of ways, I exhibit like gay stereotypes, but in a lot of ways, I don't.
Right.
Like, if someone were to like paint a gay person, I'm not exactly who they would paint, and so I think it throws people off.
Yeah. On that note, when it comes to like identity, I'm curious, Ben, as somebody who one part of your identity is that you're gay, but you've had a light shown on you with writing the book and your podcast. Um, Talk to me about that. Do you love that that's a part of your life that's just like everybody just sees you as like gay,
Mhm.
do you wish that more people saw you as a linguist or as a writer or as a professor? Or can you talk to me a little bit about?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And so I feel like my public persona is me. Like I'm not pretending like it's me.
Right,
But I don't expect everyone who just like sees my public facing side to know all the details of my life.
right.
And so that's okay. I'll tell you about an interesting experience. So my friends Kevin and Allison in Tucson, like I'm been like they're my best friends. And like since I moved away from Tucson, we Skype like at least every other week, like for 2 hours. I go to their house every Thanksgiving. Like we're very close. We've spent so much time together. And then when I was visiting for Thanksgiving a few years ago, one of my friends who was finishing up her PhD was visiting, and so she came over to the house, and so she and I are talking like PhD stuff. We're talking about dissertations and research. And then when she left, Allison was like, "I have never heard you talk like that before." And I was like, oh, well, I mean, we're doing like shop talk about dissertations. And she's like, I've just never heard you talk like that before. I was like, well, because we've never talked about dissertations. And like, that's okay. It's like you have different parts of you that come out like when, like in different ways. And so it's okay that like Allison didn't know about my academic life because that just isn't relevant to what we talk about.
Yeah.
And so I'm okay with like being known as like the gay person, but like my friends and my family, they know so much more about me.
Yeah, yeah.
Like it's just like
You're a
one
lot more
aspect of
than,
me.
yeah, I was gonna say. Does it ever bother you though? Like that you're just like seemingly like, well, let me ask the question differently. In listening to questions from the closet and listening to different things, like there's a disclaimer that happens a lot with you and Charlie, which I love the disclaimer, which is
Uh-huh.
like, this is my life. I don't represent all gay
Hmm.
LDS people or men or whatever. Talk to me a little bit about that, about maybe the weight. Do you feel a weight that's on your shoulders that like as you navigate, people are watching and getting permission or not getting permission? And what is that?
Yeah. I feel a literal weight. I just went to therapy yesterday, and my therapist was like talking about like, where do you feel that in your body? I was like, I feel it in my shoulders. Like I feel this weight to like this expectation on me, and so one of the issues is like I'm an active member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm also openly gay, and I would say the majority of gay Latter-day Saints do not remain in the church.
Right.
And so so my path is different than most. Most parents of gay kids in the church want their kids to stay in the church. Not all, but I would say the majority. And so I represent for them
Oh,
what they want for their kids that their kids aren't
if they could
fulfilling.
just be like Ben Schilaty.
Exactly. And
Yikes.
and that is unfair to the kids,
Yes.
and it's unfair for the parents to think that their kid should be like me. Like that's just not right. And so I want to just remind people like don't expect your kid to be like me. Like honor them, love them, and let them be on their path. So I used to do a ton of speaking, and I would have parents come up and talk to me like, I wish my son were like you. And I would have to give them a nice little talking to like that is like thank you for like your kindness towards me. I think if your son heard that, he would be incredibly devastated. And I was like, whatever your son is doing, I'm sure there are things in his life that you are so proud of and so excited about. Like, focus on those things and not the thing that is disappointing you.
Yeah.
So yeah. So I feel. I feel a duty since people listen to me to then point them to their loved ones. So, for example, at the end of my book, so I wrote this book called A Walk in My Shoes.
Everybody should go check it out
It's
and we'll link it. And yeah,
it's very good.
it is very good.
But
Validated.
yeah, but I start out the book with this analogy where I say like if you wouldn't, I usually wear glasses, and I would say you wouldn't take the glasses off of my face and put them on someone else's face. Say, oh, here, these will help you. Like that will just give them blurry vision and a headache. So I started the book with that analogy. Like, don't give people my lens. Like find out their prescription. And at the very end, on the second to last page, I say, please don't give this story to another LGBTQ Larry Saint. And I say, instead of giving them my story, will you invite them to tell you theirs? And when my dad read that, he's like, that's not a good way to sell books. And I was like, well, I'm not trying to sell books. I'm trying to teach people.
It's all an
And
idea. Yeah.
yeah, and so that's always my message. Like, you heard my story. Now go hear the story of your LGBTQ loved one, because their story is a story that matters. So that's always what I try and do.
And speaking of your dad, I love your dad, by the way.
He's
I
great.
don't, I mean,
Buzz, he's
I
the one.
love Buzz.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about the socks, the story with your dad about the socks? Because some listeners that might be new to you, Ben, on
Yeah.
this podcast.
Yeah. So after I came out, I was in the closet for a long time. I came out to my parents when I was 23. I didn't come out publicly until I was 30. So there were like these like 7 years where it was like something that like we knew about, and like my dad would sometimes bring up. He'd be like, "How's that whole same-sex attraction thing going?" I'd be like, "Good." That was it. Like we didn't really talk about it. And after I came out publicly, my dad was like, "I'm going to be an ally." So he got like a rainbow pin, and he got these rainbow socks. And then when it was time to write my book, like I published it through Desert Book, which is the church's publishing house, and they're like they asked me to decide what I wanted the cover to look like. I was like I was talking with my brother, my dad. I was like I want it to like say I'm gay and I'm a Latter-day Saint, like,
Right.
and so my brother came up with this idea. He said what's more like emblematic of being a member of the church than sitting in a metal chair in a gym? And so he said, why don't you sit in a metal chair in a gym with dad's rainbow socks? Like and so I bought my own pair of the socks, and then that was the cover, like a picture of me sitting in, and it's just my like knees down, just like my rainbow socks, sitting in a chair. And that was because my dad had gotten the socks, and
Yeah.
so he wears them all the time. He has a rainbow tie he wears. He's just really proud of me.
And let me ask you about this. How did that impact you to be able to have parents, father who sort of saw you, all of you, and that response? And yeah.
Yeah. There's some great research done by Dr. Lisa Diamond at the University of Utah on social safety. And like when we feel unsafe, like it physically affects our body when we don't feel safe. And when we feel social safety, like we are physically healthier. And one of the ways we provide social safety is by letting people know explicitly and repeatedly, like, you belong, I claim you. There's nothing you can do that will take you out of my life. Like, I will always love you. Like, we can disagree, we can have different viewpoints, but there will always be love. And my parents provided that. They provided me with social safety. And when I was first talking to Dr. Diamond about this, I realized, like, I go home a lot, like probably 4 times a year. And every time I leave, my dad says, "Ben, you can come home whenever you want. Like, you are always
Gosh,
welcome
what a
here."
safety net.
And when he said that, I'm like, "Oh, thanks, Dad." Like, duh. Just like being a bit of a bratty kid, like that's going on in my head. But the truth is, like, I never wonder, not even for a second, if I'm going to annoy my dad by going home. I never wonder if I'm going to be a burden, because he has made it so annoyingly explicitly clear, I am so glad when you come home.
Yeah.
And so I think we all need that. Like, we,
Yeah.
we need that kind of social safety. And so we can provide that for people, like, like, even if it sounds redundant, like telling them, like, I love you, I'm so glad you're in my life, like telling them all the time. Uh,
No, yeah, no matter what. Like, and
well, can I share one
yeah,
quick story?
for
This is
sure.
this is super simple, but after learning about this social safety thing from Dr. Diamond, like with my coworkers, I just started telling them, like, I am so glad I get to work with you. You're the best. And they're like, "Oh yeah, thanks." And then one of them later told me, like, that just means so much to me. And I was like, it's just so simple. Like, I felt it all along. I just needed to tell them.
I love that. About 10 years ago, I had a lot of friends of mine who were having faith, I call them faith questions instead
Hmm.
of crisis,
Yeah.
um, for various reasons. And I started saying, I think wanted it to be permission giving to my friends vocally, like, I hope you know I love you, whether you're in the church or out of the church. Like,
Mhm.
these weren't people that were telling me they were leaving. I was like preemptively
Yeah.
telling my friends, like, I don't love you because you're Mormon. I don't love you because this is how we met. I love you for you. So whether that changes, so whether they come out or whether they leave the faith base that we share, or whether they, I don't know, I can't, other things change about you, like, I love you where you are. And same thing, like, it was remarkable the amount of friends, some who ended up leaving the church, some who ended up staying, who were able to say, like, I didn't know that I needed to hear those words out loud.
Yeah.
I think they all knew I loved them regardless, because I had told them I love you, love you, love you. I'm a
Hmm.
loving. I like just tell people. I had a little brother who died when I was younger, and it just emphatically changed my life about how temporary life is,
Oh
and
yeah.
how much you should tell people that you care about them, not just like assume. So I'm very vocal, but it was interesting to be very vocal about that. To be very
Hmm.
vocal about, like, I love you, not this or this or this, so that they knew that if those things changed, or if they made decisions that were contrary to what they thought that I would like or not, that, like, they inherently would be would still be loved, right?
Yeah.
I think we need that.
Hmm.
I think everybody needs that. One of the interesting things, Ben, and I haven't really talked about this very much, but where I came into allyship was way young. Like, so I grew up in Oregon and Portland, where I also, it was weird to be Mormon. And
Yeah.
I also was on the track team, which everybody did, and everybody drank coffee and I didn't. So that was another thing that I like was just so weird. It was so weird, right? And I grew up in a place where people were gay and people were black and people were Jewish. And like I had
Hmm.
just like a whole cultural, I mean, Portland itself is just like this melting pot.
Yeah.
And so when I moved my senior year to Orem, Utah, and it was just sort of like 15 shades of Mormon, which there was like one shade of Mormon in
Yeah.
Portland. I
Yeah.
don't know if I'm watching it, you're just like Mormon or not, right? It
Exactly.
was wild. And then as I went to BYU, I started having multiple people um, come out to me.
Mm.
And I started to be like, God, what is that about? Like, what
Yeah.
is that about that people many times misconstruing? Like, I thought a guy was going to ask me out.
Yeah.
Right? Like these awkward moments where I was like, oh, this guy's maybe gonna ask me out. And he would sort of stumble upon like and trying to find the words, and then he would kind of say, hey Kylie, just so you know. And I ended up being the first person for a lot of people. I think, and this was before I was a therapist, and I realized that like, oh, I think people feel safe with me and maybe I should find a way to get paid to do
Yeah.
that.
Right.
But that took me a long time to figure out. But one I didn't really have a name for that, but I this idea of creating a safe place for people became kind of um, the desire of my heart.
Yeah.
Like I once I realized that the power that it was to just sit and listen to someone tell their story and create a safe enough place in my body language, in my spirit, in my reaction to them that they could just be fully seen and heard.
Mhm.
It was almost addicting, right? To be like, okay, how do I not like try to do that, but to just live a life that invited people to tell their story. And then I went to BYU Jerusalem with Ty Mansfield
Oh, fun.
before he was out.
Uh-huh.
And then he wrote his book In Quiet Desperation and then started North Star, which I have spoken at multiple times in my process of like being an ally and listening to people's stories and creating a place and wanting to like sort of be one of those people who's in the church and and creating an allyship. It's been really interesting to me, the polarizing, like just with the church and with the politics and just with people, like this balancing act of like being in and being out. And you guys talk about this a lot, especially in the changes that have happened with like both you and Charlie in your podcast being single, and then Charlie getting married,
Mhm.
and both of you staying active in the church. And do I date and do I not date, and do I and I want to ask this question. I guess all of this is to say this, Ben. It is incredibly difficult, I imagine, to be to try to, or not even try, I don't even know the word that I want to ask, to occupy that space,
Mhm.
to try to sort of be a whole person, but it would be easier maybe to be uh all Mormon and not gay, or all gay and not Mormon, right?
Mhm.
Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah. I guess the simple answer would be I know of no other way than to be both.
Yeah.
So for most of my 20s, all I wanted was to not be gay. I went to therapy to change my orientation, which does not work. I
Yes.
prayed and fasted, so many times to change my orientation. I dated women. I was like, I just want this like, quote unquote normal life.
Yeah.
And then that didn't work.
Boring, by the way.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
sorry.
yeah. And it didn't work. And then, in my late 20s and early 30s, I was like, well, I don't want I don't want the church to be right. Like I want to just like get rid of this faith that isn't working for me. But
Cognitive dissonance, right?
yeah,
Like I'll just get rid of this so that this will
yeah,
work.
and
Yeah.
I couldn't do that either. And I remember listening to this podcast episode with two people who I hadn't met then, but who have become my dear friends, Tom Christopherson and John Gustav
Oh,
Rathall, both older men. I think they're both in their 60s, and they both left the church for decades, and they're both gay, and then came back after being gone for decades. And I remember listening to that podcast and thinking, if I leave, I will come back. and I might as well just skip that part and just stay the whole time.
Just stay, yeah.
Yeah, and that was a really pivotal moment for me. Like I remember where I was and what I was like and where I was vacuuming when I was like listening to this podcast. And so, it's not easy by any means, but like there are these two parts of me, like my faith and my religion and my orientation that I just like those are both parts of me that I cannot change. And so I'm just gonna do my best to honor both.
And integral to you. I
Yeah.
just want to say, as somebody on the outside who listens, watches, loves you, like wouldn't want you to have either part gone, right? They're just so much a part of you. And I want to gift this back to you from my perspective. I think living that is also its own permission giving. Like sitting in a state of cognitive dissonance and saying, by the way you live your life, your lived evidence says that it's okay, is something I think we really struggle with.
Hmm.
Not just about gay and Mormon, but about just about anything. Like we live in a very world where people just like are pain averse, I feel like. And as
Hmm.
soon as there's like cognitive dissonance, there is a need to like flee. I need to leave the church if I don't. I need to do this. There's like we lack a little bit, I think, a little bit of this resilience to be able to say, what is that?
Hmm.
And do I have to address that at every level right now? Can I sort of put it on the shelf? If I don't want to put it on the shelf, can I sit it next to me, but I don't have to eat it or I don't have to like all or nothing it? I think part of what I love about who you are as a person, the whole of you, Ben, is that you give permission to do that, right? To sit in cognitive dissonance and say that like I don't always have to feel good and great about everything to like be a good and great person.
Yeah, and that's super kind. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I think that's why some people dislike me or might think I'm dangerous because I give people, and like from one viewpoint, permission to be active in a church that they think is hurting and damaging people, and I give other people permission to like it's okay to be gay, and they think that that's wrong and sinful.
Yeah.
And so that's where my haters come from.
Yeah.
But there's this word we talk about in the LGBTQ community, which is authenticity, and my authentic me is my Latter-day Saint me. It's my cactus loving me. It's my gay me. Like
Yeah.
like all these things are authentic to who I am,
It's your
and yeah,
professor, you, right?
yeah, exactly. Like all these things make up who I am, and if I just can't jettison a part of me. Like if I did, I would be so unhappy. And I talk to a lot of people who try to jettison part of themselves, like try and get rid of this thing, and it doesn't lead to happiness. And so we need to explore who we are, honor that, and for me, like coming to terms with like what are my core values, and then trying to live a value driven life has brought me so much meaning and purpose.
Yeah, I'm gonna go a little left field because one of the people that I feel so much a sense of a belonging or so much connection from you is Charlotte. Can
Hmm.
we talk about Charlotte for a minute?
Yeah, so Charlotte is a 90-year-old widow that I live with. I lived with her for 6 years,
Okay.
and I she has a house that's right next to BYU, and so I was a BYU student when I moved in with her. I know her daughter, and so when I moved in, I was like, like I live in her basement, but like in the main house, so we like share a house. And at first, I was like, I don't know what this will be like. I don't know what it'll be like living with this widow. I don't really know, but we became fast friends, and she started, cooking me dinners a few times a week, and we would sit down and have dinner. And then the church started this program called Come Follow Me, where you study the scriptures at home with your family. And Charlotte was like, well, what do you do if you don't have a family? I was like, well, you just read them on your own. She's like, well, why don't we just read them together? And so now for more than 5 years, we've been reading the scriptures together every week.
I
And
love this so much.
and and one of the things Charlotte does that just like means so much to me is if I come home and she's already in bed, she goes to bed early, she leaves the light to the basement on for me. And so, and I just love picturing Charlotte like going around our huge house, just like turning off all the lights, but making sure like one is turned on, so I know that like she was thinking about me.
Yeah.
And so, I don't think I'd like living alone. And now I have this person who like her life is better because I'm there, and my life is better because she's there.
Yeah.
And
Generative.
it's this unexpected friendship. I mean, we're 50 years apart in age. Like she's like as old as my grandma would be.
Yeah.
And we just have this beautiful friendship. And I remember one time, this was like maybe 2 years ago, and like I didn't have a partner like in our whole time living together. I'd like never even been on a date. I was like doing laundry, and Charlotte was like, will you promise me something, Ben? And I said, maybe. What is it? And she said, when you get married, will you get married in my house? And this, like, from someone who, like I had never, like, in the whole time we lived together, like I hadn't even been on a date, like that wasn't even close, but she had been thinking enough about this,
Way
like,
ahead.
I care about you, like I want to have this like special moment with you. And then I was like, sure, of course. And then she like went through like all the things we would do, and she like talked about the food she would make and all the other weddings they'd had in the house. Like I knew like my wedding wouldn't be a bust. And like it was just so meaningful. Like she really, really cares about me.
Yeah.
And so yeah, Charlotte is one of, this 90-year-old widow who is one of the most important people in my life.
The reason why I wanted you to talk about this is this just is another example of like creating belonging out of just like wherever you are, just like being willing to sort of make connections. I also felt seen when you started talking about Charlotte because I also am single, like didn't have a come follow me group. My
Mhm.
parents invited me to come, and then we invited my mom's sister who's older, and then this widow or this divorcee, and we had this very odd old people group that I was in for the last 4 years. And so
Mhm.
as you would talk about Charlotte, I was like, oh yeah, like I'm also doing this older, interesting group of learning and growing. Ben's doing this thing. I just wanted to say also to you, like I felt seen, like he's doing it, I'm doing it, other people are probably doing it. I hope people that are
Mhm.
single are also finding belonging places to do their own, and whether it's church study or whether it's other study, are finding, I think there's this idea that like singleness is just like you're sad and you're alone, right? Or that someone
Mhm.
has to create something for you. And I think one of the things I really like about who you are as a person is you seem to create belonging or invite belonging. And I'm grateful for that for
Yeah.
you. One of those places that I would love for you to talk to us just a little bit about is Gather,
Mhm.
and or anything really. Your questions from the closet lives, anything where you sort of create a actual physical belonging place. Why do you do that, Ben? And what is that about?
Yeah. So just a quick side story. So when I was working at BYU, I was one of the few openly gay people there. And because of the podcast and my book, a lot of people knew who I was. And so people would come and talk to me. And then I left BYU a little over a year ago, but still sometimes people would reach out. So this BYU student had reached out to me. I had met his parents and his sister, but he had been on his mission when I met them. And so he reached out to me on Instagram. He's like, "Hey, I'm so and so. You know my parents. I was on my mission when you met them, but I'm gay and I don't know who to talk to." So I was like, "Come over to my house." So this young BYU kid, like 21, comes over to my house and he's like sobbing in my living room, like telling me this story and like a story I've heard thousands of times.
Right.
It's nothing unique. And I'm just like feeling so much compassion for him. And the thing I felt prompted to tell him, I said, "I will be in your life as long as you need me to be in your life." And I said, when I was your age, I was doing this alone. And you don't have to do this alone. Like I will be here with you, and there are other people who will be here with you. Like no one ever has to do this alone ever again. And so the reason that I and so many others work on creating spaces is because we know what it's like to be alone. Like we know what it's like to have no resources to just like do it on our own, and we don't want anyone to ever have to do that. And the first group I started was like a little support group in Tucson, and that was one of the best things I've ever done. Like this little group of like 24 people that became like family to me, and we hung out all the
Did
time.
this group have a name?
What do we call it? We call it like the Tucson LDS LGBTQ,
Okay.
so
Okay.
something like
Okay.
that. But colloquially we just called our meetings gay night.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And that was great. And so my friend Allison Dayton, she runs an online group called Lift and Love,
Hmm.
and they mostly provide resources for parents. So she's a mom of a gay kid, and she had a
I met
gay.
her just at Faith Matters just recently. She's
She
amazing.
is amazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And she also had a gay brother who died by suicide a few years ago, very, very tragically. And so she's like really into this space. She's like, I'm a sibling, I'm a mom, like I want to help. And so she discovered all these parents who also had gay kids who were struggling. And she's like, I want to do something about this. So a few years ago, she got about 20 of us together, maybe it was 15, but a big group of people who were like all doing things in the space. And she's like, what can we do? Like, how can we pool our resources? How can we like do something together? And what we realized was people need connection. They need to connect with God. They need to connect with themselves, they need to connect with their communities, and they need to connect with their
Yeah.
families. And so, how can we do that? And so, we decided to create this conference that we call Gather, where we get together for 2 days, and it's LGBTQ Larry Saint focused. So, we talk about our tagline is Christ-centered support for LGBTQ Larry Saints and those who love them.
Yes.
And so, we have speakers, we have events, and we have breakout sessions. Our first year, 1,300 people came. And then this last year, just last month, we had 1,200 people. So the biggest gathering of LGBTQ Latter-day Saints ever. And it's just a blast. And, we've only had these two big events, but from each of those events, I know people who like made friends. They connect with people, and that's what it's all about, just like connecting with people. And about 40% of the people who come are parents and family members. Another 40% are LGBTQ themselves. Another 20% is like just allies and church leaders. And it's fun to like get that group of people together. And after our first conference last year, a ton of people came up to me, they're like, this was so fun, can we do this every month? And I was like, no,
No.
this was too much work. And then other people were like, well, can I start, like, I want to start a support group, but I just don't know how. And so the very next day, this thought came to my mind. So the conference is called Gather, and the thought came to my head of a program called Gatherings, which is based on, this scripture reading, this Come Follow Me scripture reading. And so we made this little curriculum called Gatherings, and there are three parts to it. There's a scripture part, which is like follows the regular Come Follow Me reading. And then there's a story of faith part, which is about an LGBTQ person sharing their story with discussion questions about that. Then just a share your story part, like a one question, like share your story that has to do with the reading. And so people can just start they're gathering in their own home, just like invite their friends, their neighbors. And now there are a few hundred of them all over the country, and a few in other countries, just like this little idea I had. And we haven't made this the official tagline yet, but I want the tagline to be, all you need to change the world is a lot of love in a living room.
Oh, which
So
is in essence the summary of I mean, the belonging place. This is what I finding people that are what I call creating wells, gathering places for people where the water is, where people fall in love, where people it's an outcropping of that though. Like the gathering place itself is its own purpose, right?
yeah.
And I love that.
Mhm.
Well, Ben, before we end, let me just ask you an open-ended question. When it comes to like connection and belonging, and is there anything when you look around in your life that, I mean, you shared a few already, but that you can think of, or pain points in your life where connection really changed? Yeah, is there anything that you feel like, man, I feel really called to share this on this
Yeah.
podcast?
Going back to cacti,
Yeah.
one of the reasons I love saguaros, the tall cactus with the arms, is they grow so slowly. Like it takes them 50 to 70 years before they grow their first arm. So if you see a cactus with a bunch of arms, that thing's over 100 years old. Like
And you
they're,
can't cut them down in Arizona.
no,
They are
they're
like,
protected.
yes.
And so they grow slowly. And so it's okay to grow slow. Like it's okay to take your time. Like you don't have to have it all figured out right now. And also they're also unique. Like they're each one is majestic, but they all look so different. Like they all have their own personalities. Like no two saguaros are the same, and we're like that too. We're all different and unique, and also majestic in our own ways.
Yeah.
And so finding the beauty in like your own uniqueness is absolutely wonderful, but also seeing the beauty and the uniqueness of everyone. And what I have learned is there's not a single person that I wouldn't love if I really got to know them. And so, but you asked me like what do I want people to know? Like I think belonging isn't like this on and off switch. It's like you belong or you don't belong.
Yeah.
It's more of like a dimmer switch. Like we feel different levels of belonging in different places. And there are some places where like I feel like I super belong, and places where I feel like I don't totally belong, and then all kinds of places in between. But the places where I feel the most belonging are when someone sincerely is curious about me and my life. Like we don't have to have the same experiences, but if they sincerely care about me and my life, that's what does it. And one of those people is Dr. Lisa Diamond, who like isn't part of my faith community. She's older than me, and she's got this quirky hair. But every time I talk to her, she just like actually cares about me and my life. and she doesn't have to know a thing about Mormonism. She doesn't have to know anything, but she actually cares about me. My parents joined the church right before I was born, like right after they got married, and so most of my relatives aren't Latter Day Saints. And my aunt, who I'm very close with, she thinks that Mormonism is silly at best, maybe a little stupid. And then when I wrote my book, which is very churchy, she bought a copy and read it
Oh gosh. Yeah.
because it matters to her that like this is something that matters to me, so it's going to matter to her. And I just have so many people in my life who are like that, who are like, we don't get this thing, like whether it's the gay thing or the Latter-day Saint thing, but they just really want to
But we
know.
get you. I'm going
Yeah,
to show up for you. I mean,
it,
that's part of being friends, right? That's part of creating a safe space for people is I'm going to show up for you. I'm not
exactly.
just going to say it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to buy the book. I'm going to come to the gathering, you know.
Yep. And that's something I've really learned from my parents. Like my parents, they show up for people. Like Schilaty's, we show up for
I
people.
love that.
And I want to continue to do that for people, and I hope people will keep doing that for me. Like whatever matters to me will matter to them. And there's a scripture in the Book of Mormon where when we get baptized, we make some promises, and we promise to mourn with those that mourn, to comfort those that stand in need of comfort, and to bear one of those burdens that they will be light. And if I were to add something that we promise to do, it's also to rejoice with people who are rejoicing. Like whatever is bringing someone joy in their life, like let's rejoice with them. And so that's what belonging looks like to me, like rejoicing with people who are happy.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Last thing I want to say to you is we talked a little about the weight that you carry. I hope there's also um, actually in that scripture that your burdens might be light. I hope some of the light burden that you carry, or that I see that you carry, Ben, is that you are saving actual lives. Like actual, it makes me emotional just as much as you are carrying burdens of like this balance, the spaces that you create. The rebranding of the podcast is called what?
It's called All Out in the Open.
All out in the open. Everybody go look at the spaces for the podcast, for the gatherings, for the lives that you do, for the group that you guys just held at Faith Matters, for just all the things that you put out there. I just want you to know that like it. I hope that you can feel at times. I wish it was more than the other, but like in life, it's usually the harder things stick out. The good that you're doing by creating these huge, important, big, needed belonging places and giving permission for people to just be their authentic selves. And I wish for the hard days and when the things come out that are hard and the messages and the talks that come out, I wish for that to also be on your soul and on your heart, the good that you're doing. So
Thank you. That's
yeah,
so kind.
yeah.
And such a pleasure to be here today.
Thanks, Ben. I appreciate it.